Well, hello everybody. Welcome to our new episode of our webinar series, Tawheed, Spiritual Unity of the Three Principles. Today is a really special day as we have one of the amazing guests, Bill Pettit, Dr. Bill Pettit. And today I'm joined here by my co-host, Harry Devinsky, who's the president of ACT Training. And I am Omar Ben Musa, transformational coach. So good to have everyone here. Today's topic gonna be about a psychiatric view of the three principles as covered by Sydney Banks. And we couldn't have thought of a better guest than Dr. Bill Pettit. And Dr. Bill Pettit, he's a psychiatrist for 36 years. He's a retired psychiatrist, actually. And he's been thought by the source of this understanding, Mr. Sydney Banks, for 26 years. And the first time I met Dr. Bill was in 2019 in the 3P conference, the 3P UK conference. And it was such a beautiful conference and such a beautiful, meeting with Dr. Bill, because I only saw his videos like before meeting him, and I was impacted. Really impacted by his sharing and the way he shared, and since I was a psychology student as well. And when I talked with Dr. Bill, it was we really connected, and we had a laugh, and it was so amazing to ask Dr. Bill what I had in mind and get it answered, and just enjoyed his talk. I still remember when he did his first talk in the 3P UK conference in 2019. It was the second day of the conference, and I remember that day I was, you could say, I was in a really bad mood, and as I was volunteering the conference, I was fasting that day because it was Ramadan, and I didn't get too much sleep, and I was so excited for that. So when I got there and I listened to Dr. Bill, it really put me in a place of, that place of peace and love and connection, and what he talks about in that day, like I would never forget about, where he shared the story about when he called Sydney Banks to tell him that he loved the new addition in his book, Second Chance, and Mr. Banks was laughing because he didn't change anything, and Bill was just having a new insight, and it was there all the time, but he couldn't see it, as we all do, And he was ready to see something new, so he did, and yeah, so really good to have you here, Bill. I'll give it over to Harry to talk a bit about his experience with Bill, and yeah, go ahead, Harry.
Thank you, Omar.
To me, Bill personifies something very unique. In a way, he has been the pioneer in the field of psychiatry with 3P. But what has always touched me about Bill, beside his humanness, and Bill is a really beautiful human being, is his connection to the truth, and his unbelievable passion to bring Sydney Banks along with what he understands. And when he does that, he does what I love. It allows him to go into the spiritual aspects of the three principles. Obviously, from his perspective, when he as a psychiatrist, a doctor, talks about that and brings in the spiritual, that's what Sid loved. He loved people who could take his full message. So last time Bill and I talked, we did a presentation at the addiction conference introducing Sid. And one of the things that was noticeable is that is something we love, absolutely love. And with that, Bill, you're free to talk about whatever comes your mind. We picked a very generic topic, so you can go around, and anybody who has questions, go ahead and ask them and so on. Have a good time.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so the generic area, Omar, is psychiatry and the three principles. Is that the kind of
The topic, yeah, a psychiatrist perspective on the three
okay,
principles as is covered by Sydney Banks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Omar, have you had any questions or intake from people, that things that they'd love to have me speak to? Has there been any questions that people have come to you with? Or?
We haven't asked people to come up with any questions, but I've got people here that will ask their questions while, we're just talking,
great.
something that occurs to them.
Okay. And how much time do we have?
Unlimited, Bill. We don't have a set finish.
Okay. I mean 75 minutes? Do we have 75 minutes from when we started?
Absolutely could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or yeah, and
no, what we'll know when it's kind of people are tired.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking that maybe if I talked for 30 or 35 minutes, then that would leave 40 minutes. People would know that there was going to be 40 minutes for questions. Does that sound like
perfect? That sounds good.
But I like Harry said, sometimes you just know when it's time to take questions and when it's time to stop, etc. But kind of so people kind of have some map of where, at least at this point, we're going, so they know they'll have time to do that. And because in a way, I think that what I'd love to have people do for the next 35 minutes or so is to just be present and kind of thank your brain for sharing its comments. And if you have something that you need to write down, that you want to ask later, maybe write a couple of words that'll help you do that. And then as quickly as you can, just get back present with me and with all of us. The power of all of us being in the present moment. I'm not sure, it might not even have some effect on the world. So I think that's very powerful for us all to be. Interestingly, as Sid said, even to his last days, he said, here I've spent all these years attempting to help people live in the only thing that exists, which is the now. Huh? I mean, it's a simple statement and we hear it, but I don't know that we really hear it sometimes. That even infinity is just an infinite number of nows. It takes some of the fear or some of the, even out of infinity. It's just an infinite number of nows. Before I share a little bit of my story, because I don't know, Omar, people, it's probably worthwhile sharing a little bit of my journey to the principles and my experience with Sid as a kind of would that make sense? Or
Bill, you go wherever you like, Bill.
Okay.
Just roll wherever it takes you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Omar, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I just said, like as Harry said, like just go with the flow. We don't try to plan this kind of calls. Just, let's divine mind guide us all.
Thank you. That frees me up. The first thing, before I even share a little bit about my journey and then what that's meant to me, and in a way, I would say I am a retired psychiatrist. I actually was a psychiatrist for almost 45 years. 50 years almost. I was a physician. I'm 78 years old. And I'm so grateful because inside I feel younger than I did when I was 40. Not physically, I can't do what I used to able to do physically, but in my spirit, I feel younger. I feel like I've returned to my childhood where I play a lot more of my days. So when we were talking about the now, I was reminded of a story that, I mean, a story came to me that is very powerful, and it's a recent story I was told by a good friend of mine. His name is Shadrach Mazaza, and he's a physician, native African, actually, Omar, from Cape Town, trained in medicine in Great Britain, the United Kingdom. And if you're ever interested to go on YouTube and just put in Dr. Shadrach Mazaza, it's you'll get a 12-minute TED Talk, which is powerful. But he was a family physician in 2003. And he was seeing a young patient, and suddenly 3 young African men burst into his office and pointed guns at his secretary and said, "We're here to rob you." And they burst into his office, and very quickly one of them put a gun to his head and told him that at the count of something, and this is as I remember it, I'm going to kill you and blow your brains out. And this was 12 years before Shadrach was introduced to the principles. He'd been on a spiritual search for years, but he said, "Bill, I was just really surprised that," and I'm sure he'd seen enough that he got just present, because I'm sure our brains would go a little crazy at that moment with a lot of input. And he said, "I felt really calm. And what came out of my mouth was, you can't kill me. I'm not this body. I will be fine. You can kill my body, and I have no control over whether you do what you said you're going to do." And it so took the young man back that he was startled. He said, "You're not frightened?" And he said, "No, I'm not." He said, I'll be fine, whatever you decide to do." And it was so alarming to the young man that I think it touched his humanity and what we call universal mind or whatever. And he said, he started apologizing. He said, "We're just trying to get money to get a friend out of prison. And that's why we're robbing you. I'm sorry we have to do this." And Shadrach said, he started joking. Shadrach says, "Well, given what you're doing, it seems much more likely that you're going to end up in prison with your friend than you are get him out of prison." And again, of course, the man was astounded that this guy's making jokes after he just was going to blow his brains out. And they took him out front, and he gave them the money that we had in whatever money they had in the office, and they left. And he said to his administrative assistant, and I'll just call her Jeannie, he said, "Jeannie," he said, "are you okay?" And she said, "I think I am, Dr. Mazaza." And he said, do you need to go home?" She said, "No, I think I'm okay," because they had an office full of patients. And he said, "Okay." He said, "Would you please have the next patient come in then?" So the next patient comes in, and she's got a little 3-year-old with a really high fever. And the lady says, "Dr. Mazaza, I heard through the door, I heard everything that happened. Are you sure you can do this?" And it was interesting because Shadrach, I think, even had some amazement himself that he said, "I found myself," and it was true. "I said to her, that was then, and this is now. Let's see if I can be of help to you and your small child with a fever." Wow. 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 think one of the gifts that I've received from my exposure to the principles is the ability to realize and just go to the present moment more and more, to know that every single moment of my life is a second chance. It's a second chance. I can't do a whole lot of what happened 5 minutes ago, 5 seconds ago, 5 years ago, 25 years ago. For me, it's 78, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I can't do a whole lot about what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, or 30 minutes from now, or 3 weeks from now, other than be in the present moment, and I might see something that I might be able to do about the future. And I might see something to do about the past. I may owe somebody a written apology, or in the old days before the pandemic, a face-to-face apology. But it all comes from being one place in the present moment. I'd like to think that I'm talking to you much more as a human being than as a psychiatrist. As a human being that yes, I went through training and experience, and I am a lifelong learner. I for the last 45 years, I received, it used to be audio cassettes, now they're CDs, and they're asking me to do it online, reviewing 16 articles a month in psychiatry. So if you do 16 a month times 12 times 45 years, it's a fairly big number. And I also receive it in family medicine too, because I do consider myself still a physician, even though I'm not practicing. Haven't been for about 2 years. And I want to know about where medicine is at the current, and if it'd be fun if we had 4 or 5 days to talk, because I could share you some exciting things. But my own journey did start. It started on April Fool's Day, 1983. Well, it started long before that, but on January 1st, 1983, I met a man that many of you have probably heard of, Dr. George Pransky. He was one of the earliest psychologists, along with Dr. Roger Mills and Dr. Rick Suarez, and later, very soon after, Dr. Keith Blevins. And I met him on January 1st, 1983. And we sat sometime in March. We sat after a couple of a flood, and something else delayed our meeting. And back then in 1983 was just 10 years after Sid's experience, which was in 1973. And there were no books. There were no audio tapes, even that I had available at that time. There were certainly no videotapes. I guess there were some audio tapes that I became aware of from the late 70s. So in 1983, I listened to Sid. I listened to George Pransky for 2 hours. I met him at called the Mac Hotel, and I remember driving over the bridge to San Quentin Prison on the way there. And we sat for 2 hours, and I have 26 and a half years of education. I'm not brilliant by any means. I've been gifted with fair intelligence. And as I listened for 2 hours as quietly as I could, then I was impacted. I knew that if any of you would have been waiting, if Omar and Harry, or Omar and Britt, or Zamar, Gatri, anybody, Thomas, if would have been waiting for me at the coffee shop and would have asked me as I came in after those 2 hours, is this really a breakthrough in the field of life and psychiatry and psychology and science and religion that Einstein's 1905 papers, 1905 papers on relativity was a breakthrough. And I think I might have hesitated for a little bit and then said, I think it is. I think it's that huge. I think it's even bigger than Einstein's. I don't know if I would have known it was bigger then. I know clearly it's bigger now. But it's at least as big as Einstein's breakthrough papers in 1905. And of course, I think you would have probably said, well, tell us about it. Tell us about it. And I would have looked kind of whatever, dumbfounded and said, I don't know. The best I think I can do is that it's about a nice feeling and something to do with thought. But that started my journey. And George asked me if I would come and listen to this welder with a 9th grade education that had changed his life. He said, before I met Sid Banks, I'd been in practice a number of years as a psychologist, and the score in dealing with people's problems, the score was problems 218, Pransky 6. Now, George is a practical man, as I was. That's what allowed me to spend 2 years in surgery initially after medical school, because I liked the practicality of it. Somebody comes in with a acute gallbladder attack and you take the gallbladder out, or an appendicitis or an injury, you sew them up and you put things back together, and there's a practicality of it. And then at some point, if you think about it, then you let something that we never talk about heal the body. Doctors don't heal the body. And yet, even as a 78-year-old man, if I would fall and break my leg today, they'd put it in a cast so I couldn't move it, and they'd tell me don't bear any weight on it. And 6 to 8 weeks later, even at 78 years old, my bone would be healed. Wow. Wow. I'm here to tell you that there is nothing from being in psychiatry for 45 years and being from working from this understanding with incremental insights for 37 years, 38 years now. There is nothing that human beings can experience that can break their spirit. It cannot even scratch their mental well-being. No one is broken. No one is lacking. Because we're talking about the spirit. We're talking about the connection to the divine. Now, like Sid, and I mean it, I don't ask anyone to believe anything, as Harry said, my take on the 3 principles. It's just one person's take from my 38 years. But I'll tell you what I see. I've come to see that universal mind is 100% beneficent. That what's behind life is pure love and understanding. Again, I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm just being honest with you the way I see it. there's a place in Second Chance where Richard, and Sid told me that that story was, and the follow-up was based on a true experience. Of the 5 stories, that's the only one that I know was based on a true experience of somebody that actually did come up to him out of the blue during the time that he was in Maui. And that character, and he of course invented the character Mama Lila, the older wise Hawaiian woman. And she said, "Are you frightened by death?" And he said, I'm really frightened by death." She said something to the effect that death is nothing to be frightened about. You'll have a true illumination of mind, and you will see your own beauty and your own innocence. You'll see that you're loved unconditionally. That wasn't the God that I grew up with. The image of a source behind life. The source that I grew up with was pretty judgmental and pretty vindictive. If you didn't walk a straight line. So seeing that universal mind is totally beneficent really changes everything. Changes everything. And it changes everything as a psychiatrist, and I'm certainly starting on an 18-month project to have at least one book written by my 80th birthday on May 31st, 2022. And I've got some friends that are, I think, going to help me make that possible. But it changes. It is going to change over time. It's going to change psychiatry. It's going to change psychology. It's going to change everything, I think. And it may be 50 years after I'm gone. You know, Sid, it's been 47 years since his experience in 1973. It usually takes about 50 years generally when there's if you've ever read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of a Scientific Revolution, it takes about 50 years for a lot of the old guard to die off and the younger people to have their insights, and people to start listening and being willing to, especially when when the present paradigm is in crisis. It's a ripe time for a new paradigm. And the paradigm that we're operating from politically, psychiatrically, psychologically is in crisis. Throughout the world, the incidence of suicide is increasing tremendously. In the United States, from 1996 to 2017, it increased nearly 30%. In adolescent females, I should relook up the number, I'm sure you can, but it's massively, it's 160% or something like that, or 300%. Allergies in the last 20 years have increased 3,000%, 30-fold in the United States. You say, what the hell does that have to do with anything? If we activate autoimmune disease, allergies, suicides, why autoimmune diseases and why allergies? Because when we innocently, and please hear the word underlined 5, 10, many times as you need to underline innocent. when we innocently misuse this energy of life that we get to use in a personal way, divine mind that we get to use in a personal way, when we innocently misuse it and we don't listen to or even aware that there's wonderful alarms that are given to us to know that when we're misusing it, we often, what we do is we activate a stress response in the body. Those people that are scientists, would know it as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. But for most of us, that's not our area of expertise. It's easy. It's just as easy. It's the fight or flight response. The fight, flight, or some people would say fight, flight, or freeze response. Because some people don't flee and they don't fight, they freeze. And then there's a woman named Sarah Taylor from UCLA who's shown that women, oftentimes there's a fourth possibility, and we need to listen to the women, I think, a lot more than we ever have. Because the fourth thing that Sarah Taylor talked about from UCLA, Dr. Sarah Taylor, is not only fight, flight, and freeze, but befriend. That sometimes we can befriend people, or even befriend the challenge that we're faced with. In a way, I would say that, in a strange way, that Dr. Mazaza befriended the man who had a gun to his head by letting him know that he'd be fine. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine, whatever you decide to do. There was a TV show in the United States that some people, I know may not be aware of, especially from a different culture or even different time period, because I only people like Harry and I might remember this, but there was a show called it was the Maverick Brothers, Brett and Bart Maverick, and I'm trying to think of the name of the show. I can't say it right now. And they used to always quote their grandpappy. And their grandpappy had a lot of common sense. I mean, one of the silly things he'd say is he'd say, grandpappy used to say, you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time. And those are pretty good odds. That's not my point, but that did come to my mind. But the thing that he said if you can't fight them, and you can't join them, it's time to run. Well, it's interesting because if you notice, he brought right with fighting, before he brought fleeing, he brought befriending. If you can't fight them and you can't join them, but at least make an effort to join them first. And then if you can't do that, then run. When we get caught up in worry, guilt, unresolved grief, all from the past, beating ourselves up or holding on to anger and resentment to people that we think hurt us or did, and losses that we've had. In the future, when we get caught up in worry, the what ifs, what if, 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 what if. I tell people 2 what ifs multiply faster than the most fertile rabbits in the world. Because within 10 minutes, you got hundreds of those little suckers running around. Over and analyzing. For 41 years, when I didn't know what to do, I was taught to pray, and that's a beautiful thing. I still do that. I say, God is as I know God to be. I'm lost here. I need some help. The problem was, until 38 years ago, after I did that, I remembered what I'd been taught, which was, Billy, God helps those that help themselves. So I said, oh, okay, got it. So I went to help myself, and I went to my toolbox to help myself. And I found one tool: analysis, analytical thinking. I have a son who has a construction company. He's got $35,000, I think, in tools. What if he went to a construction site and he only opened his bag and he only had a hammer? As they say, everything would start looking like a nail. And that's all I had to deal with uncertainty in life, was analytical thinking. And it usually paralyzed me, because I didn't know that I was actually, at my essence, the divine thought system that had taken on a form. I'll say that again. I didn't know that I was the divine thought system, the divine energy with the intelligence of divinity. I didn't know that that's what my true essence was. I didn't know that. Now, that doesn't make the intellect the enemy. It means it's a partner, a junior partner. If I go to a doctor, I want them to have deep spiritual grounding and be in a state of love and understanding. But I also want them to have some medical knowledge and to put the two together. I didn't know that the primary difference between me and my lemon tree in the backyard, besides mobility, I didn't know that we were both the divine thought system in a form. Only that, unlike the tree, I had the ability to use that power in my own personal way and do my own free will, and wonder why life got harder when I did, instead of listening. To the degree that we get caught up in that, and the other two ways to me that we take ourselves, besides the past and the future, in the present, I think that I look back on my own life either through ego, through trying to prove myself, driving myself to try to constantly prove that I was an okay being, or being jerked around by fear that I wasn't good enough, and being frightened of things. Because if you take fear and insecurity away in the present moment, all that's left is love and understanding. And so on April Fool's Day, 19, and I'll finish here in a couple of minutes. And on April Fool's Day in 1983, I sat there listening to a welder with a 9th grade education. I was 41 years old. I had 26 and a half years of formal education. I had probably 800 to 900 lectures on mental illness and medications. And I had 0 lectures on mental well-being. 0, folks. 0 lectures on mental well-being. And yet, when I got board certified in psychiatry, when I passed my oral and written boards in psychiatry, one was in Boston, the other was in New York, I was told and designated as what? As a mental health professional. Can you imagine somebody being designated as a quantum physicist who had never had one lecture in quantum physics? Sounds pretty strange to me. I'd been struggling with clinical depression, going in and out of depression for 21 years at the time. I've been treated by 6 different psychiatrists who were nice people. They were good people. And they helped me make it through medical school, college, medical school, residency, without having to stop my training. Because they were present with me, they comforted me enough that I slowed down enough in retrospect that I accessed the intelligence of universal mind, and I made it through. But as I sat there listening to Mr. Banks on April Fool's Day, 1973, within 30 minutes, I realized this man knows more, 1,000 times more about mental health than I do. And the last thing I'll say before I take questions that might help people even as they do questions is, I pass these on to Harry. Harry, you were the first person that I saw these 5 Ds. I've called them different things, but to me, when we get lost in our thinking, I used to not know that I was off glide path until I crashed into the mountain with either low back spasms, terrible kidney stones, ruining a relationship, doing something way outside my own moral code. I crashed because I didn't know that I was creating, that I was going further and further away from home, from my spiritual essence. So I see 5 areas that universal mind, in its total beneficence, I'm going to give you 5 things that to me happened to me that I see now as gifts, I see as alarms, I see as information. And I even see, about a year ago, I was speaking in Spain at Albert at the Viva event, and I knew I was going to be doing the keynote on the mind-body connection. And in the shower, it suddenly came to me that these are not just alarms and information, that what I'm going to speak to are actually love letters from a beneficent, I'm going to use the word God, beneficent, universal mind at the source of creation. So what are the 5 alarm systems that I think we're being given every moment of our life to know, just not to be analyzing but just to be aware. If my mood goes down, the only thing that can take let's do it this way. I'm going to do the 5 Ds. Dysthymia. It's a fancy word for I'm not quite depressed yet, but I'm feeling like crap. One of the early signs that I'm off track is I notice that I don't have a sense of humor, that life isn't funny. It's not joyful. I lose my lightheartedness. That's the first step. Dysthymia. Number 2, instead of being at ease with a quiet serenity and a feeling of peace, I experience second D, dis-ease. D-I-S-ease. Interesting, kind of a play on the word disease, because if I keep going, believe me, I will be headed there. Number 3. So we've got mood, tension, my thinking. My thinking becomes distractible. I'm suddenly misplacing my keys, misplacing my TV remote, missing appointments. I'm distractible. My thinking has gone from clarity to muddled. And if I keep going far enough, I'm going to get pretty lost in my thinking. 4th thing, so I've got mind, tension, thinking. 4th one, body. I'm going to feel discomfort. The 4th D, I am going to feel discomfort somewhere in my body. It's a love letter. It's not something more to now worry about. Man, here I am worrying about my mom's breast cancer or my grandson's cocaine habit, and now I've got a darn migraine, or my back's out, or my neck hurts. something, I'm going to feel discomfort, and probably I'm going to start having trouble sleeping because of the massive amounts of norepinephrine from the stress response that I'm pouring into my body. By the way, that stress response is meant to be activated for up to 30 minutes, once every 24 to 72 hours. After that, it becomes destructive. It's meant to, for our ancestors to, or us to deal with a life-threatening situation for up to 30 minutes. What's the fifth thing? The fifth D is disconnectedness. I'm going to start feeling disconnected from other people, from myself, and from whatever I call source or God or universal mind. I'm going to feel alone. And the only person that can create that experience of separation is me. It can't be created by anything external to me. And I think there's a sixth thing that I haven't got the D yet. And it would be, I'll go to the extreme. It would be in behavior. I notice that I'm starting to do things that at some degree are destructive behavior. The opposite of unhealthy. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm doing things that are unhealthy, that are, even at the beginning, it might be a small amount, they're destructive. So that's the 6D. If indeed every human being is a divine entity taking on a form, looking to become aware of what they are, then there's no such thing as mental illness, other than, as Sid says, it's a lack of spiritual and psychological understanding that makes it appear that there's a difference between people's psyches.
Bill, sorry to cut you
Yeah.
off, but someone just asked, can you repeat the fifth D?
The fifth D, I think the fifth D was, let's see, I did dysthymia, I did dis-ease, I did, and the thinking distractible, and then in the body discomfort, and the fifth one would be destructive behavior, so unhealthy behavior. But if we were looking for a D, something that's destructive to my health, psychological and physical. So what I'm going to do right now is ask for an old man's bladder break, because my coffee has reached a point where I will be able to speak and listen much better to your questions with an empty bladder. So I will be back in about 60 to 90 seconds. Prepare your questions.
Bill, I have compassion for that particular.
Well, if you can say, oh, I'm just leaving for Bill's sake, but Harry, if you need to do the same, I won't feel so isolated.
I'm okay so far.
I won't feel so isolated and alone.
Right.
I'll be back.
Okay. We're gonna time him. Okay.
Okay. Ready, set, go.
Okay. Yeah. So if you ask questions, it will bring a lighter mood and a more interactive exchange of ideas, and lift the energy. Participate, guys. It's really makes it a lot of fun, and we all learn from it. And if you have a question, it's usually a question that other people have as well. And Bill loves answering questions anyway, so it'll be good. But nothing about him taking his break.
I really loved what you said about the, to me, that was like a pinnacle in my understanding, something I discussed with you. It was when he said he went to you go to a doctor's, and yes, you want love and understanding, but the intellect of him having the understanding of things, and it really sort of brought to home how we are actually, how many of us, and we've touched on this many times, how many of us are so connected to divine, our divine sides, but really always trying to push the intellect away, saying no, and it almost really sort of let's say, stabilized or was less aggressive in the approach to sometimes how we feel about ourselves, and took me back to the innocence of it all. So I really liked the way I heard that piece of information. So yeah.
It's good to hear from a doctor. You know, it's like most of us are laymen, you know, and certainly one of the noticeable things I have experienced is that a lot of the teachers are psychiatrists or psychologists. They're clinical and I am, to be honest, the exact opposite. But I love, you know, you're right. Aaliyah's mentioning how you impacted something for her, Bill. And could you explain it again to Bill?
Oh, okay. Hi, Bill.
Hi,
So
let me find you. Let me find you. Who is it speaking?
Okay, hang on. I'm just going to come
It looks
straight
like
on
Aliyah, but it's pronounced Aaliyah.
We had
Aaliyah.
this Aaliyah.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Doing?
Yeah, that's fine, Aaliyah. Yes, go ahead. Where
So
where are you? Where are you, Aaliyah?
I'm waving. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I know, but where are you physically?
Oh, sorry. I'm in
That's
London.
okay.
I'm in London,
Okay.
UK.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Aaliyah.
So something that really impacted me, and I've probably heard it many a times, but just the way that you said it really sort of settled me. And you said how, you know, when you go to see a doctor, you want the divine in them, the love and the understanding. So that's taking away the fear and the insecurities. But the knowledge of the intellect, of their knowledge of medicine, really did something for me, because at this point, what I found that I've been doing in my own transition, and I call it a transition because there is, I'm definitely someone who associates with the second thing, which is the dis-ease. I realized that that running from the intellect, because for me, the intellect at that point has been something that attacks, or it's something to be, disregarded. And it's that balance, isn't it, of the spiritual and thing. And most of us, we access that divine moment of understanding. And then when the intellect comes in, we're running from it, and we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to deal with the anxiety, the fears and the insecurities. And yeah, for me, what you said was really powerful, and really quite a big blessing for me in this precise moment. So thank you, Bill. I think
you're welcome.
More that what I wanted to say. So
yeah, no, you're welcome. You know, tell me if I've heard you. What I hear is, you know, what Sid talks about is lucky are those who have harmony, synchronicity between their intellect and the universe. He would say that the harmony with the personal mind and the impersonal mind, right? And I think that oftentimes we do think that those are two separate things. And Sid makes it very clear that we're not talking about two different minds. There's only the mind of God. But unlike the flowers or the tree or the animal, we get to use the power of that universal mind in a personal way.
Yeah.
So we get, you know, my lemon tree, I don't think the lemon tree can say, I'm taking a year off, I'm not making lemons this year. I'm not doing it, you know. Or I tell people, if you cover a flower bed on 3 sides and you cover it even on the top, a bed of flowers, let's say a 6 by 6 feet flower bed, okay? Cover it on 3 sides and the top, and you leave one end open. What happens? What happens?
Still blooms.
Pardon?
Still blooms.
Well, yeah. What happens? Those flowers that are not covered start doing what? They literally will start bending to the light. They will 100% of the time. They will seek the light. Not only so they can have light, but for the flowers behind them can have light. And I don't know how it is in the Muslim culture, but so you can tell me whether this joke holds or not. But I tell people all of them bend towards the light, even the adolescent flowers.
We do have something that goes with that within the Muslim faith. What we are always taught is, and this is why the three principles kind of really appeal within our community, definitely, and it resonates so much because we know we're always naturally inclined to what we call the fitra, which is the essence that recognized, that testified, that heard and fell for what you would call the beneficent. We call him the beneficent too, the Most High. Okay. That oneness. And so every soul created is always seeking and always touching on that one place. That what you know, so yeah, we it resonates with us, and it is, we're always bending towards it, and we're always flipping ourselves over, and then suddenly but we know better. We always know. It's knowing that's always within you.
As soon as we quiet down even a little bit, don't we? It's about quieting down to so we can hear and listen, you know. And you know, the joke that I was saying, Aaliyah, is that in our society, so I said, not only all of the flowers bend to the light, even the adolescent ones. The adolescent flowers don't fold their arms and say, "Make me." Right? Even the adolescent ones bend to the light, but so we have the ability to use this power of personal mind, of universal mind, in a personal way, and that's wonderful, because every human being on earth, all 7 billion plus people, have a different storage material. There's no two people that have the same storage material in their brain, right? Yeah. So there's no two people that have the same exact thought system. There's no two people that have. Now, you know, there may be people from this culture or this religion or this that have, but even those that, you know, right?
Opinions.
Oh yes, everybody has their own personal separate reality that they're experiencing life, but everyone is connected to this same universal reality, the same spiritual essence. And that what I tell people is, what I did so often in life when I didn't know what to do, I went over and over and over, and I'm going to make this big enough so it shows up, but usually I put it on the board with a very thin pencil. Do you see the little dot in the center? That dot represents what Bill Pettit knows. Make that a little sphere and put it inside a huge stadium in some country. And if you put a lid on Wembley Stadium, and that little dot represents, that little sphere floating around there represents what Bill Pettit knows in his intellect from 78 years of living and 26 and a half years of formal education. And all the other space inside and outside of Wembley Stadium represents the divine thought system that is available to me 24/7. And yet when I didn't know what to do in my life, people often end up in the mental hospital going round and round and round with 100,000 thoughts in that little, looking for the answer in their intellect. Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
Okay. Resonates beautifully. Thank you so much.
Einstein said it. Yeah, thank you. Einstein said it this way. He said, he knew the divine thought system. He said, I think something 99 times and I get nothing. Anybody besides me ever done that along with Einstein? And he said, so I stopped thinking. And what he means is I stopped paying attention. I stopped fighting. You talked about fighting our intellect. it's not worth fighting or feeding it. If you don't fight it or feed it, you fall back into the divine thought system. Einstein said, I think 99 times I get nothing. So I stop thinking, meaning I stop paying attention. I swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. Wow. He never heard of Sid Banks. He died long before Sid had his experience. But he knew, Sid said, truth, didn't he, Harry? He said often, truth is everywhere. It's always been here.
Just like silence is everywhere. It's always there. And in fact, I actually define mind as silence.
Well, we'll have to get the dictionary of Harry Dubinsky out for so we know.
Well, it's always a different version than the official version. So,
you know, the other thing, even Carl Jung, who was a wonderful seeker of truth, he said, it's interesting. He saw something, but people, God love them, they saw something, and we're just gifted to have had to have a big peek into the mind of God, I think. But Carl Jung said, man will never relieve his suffering by his own thinking. Wow. That kind of wipes out a multi-billion-dollar industry, doesn't it? That has people sitting and talking about their thinking and their past and their man will never relieve their suffering by their own thinking, but only by revelations of a wisdom beyond their intellect. Wow.
that is wow. That is
Only by revelations of a wisdom beyond their intellect. But God love him, because he hadn't seen the principles. He then had people do 1,000 hours of Jungian analysis, even though he just said, that's not where the answer is. I have a friend who's a physician in the UK, psychiatrist, who's now a 3 principles psychiatrist. He said, if I would have been exposed to this earlier, I wouldn't have done 1,000 hours of Jungian analysis. Anyway, I can go at least
shadow he talked about, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Sorry, I thought I was muted. I'm so sorry.
No, what did you say?
No, because when you were talking about Carl Jung, and you were saying that he that one thought that he had, and one of the things that I thought about was when he actually made that statement. It's funny, he knew something far beyond, but
Right.
all that he taught prior to that about dealing with the shadow, working with this, working with that, and it was that one insight that he had that was probably one of his later insights that would have led mankind out of the mess of sitting in the past and trying to figure out what your demons were or your insecurities were, and sitting in that thought. And that was his own transition into this understanding of it's just that one thought. And he'd had that one thing, but his work is followed. So, as you said, with the, what did you call it? The yin method.
Well, no, yeah, Carl Jung, yeah, I just, and it's not that there wasn't things that he saw, but so it's incremental. I think we need to appreciate those that have had glimpses of this and that have tried to point in this direction, but you can only point to what you see, And I just want to say, I can go at least to half past the hour. Harry and I have a meeting at 30 minutes after that of old timers. I think that are meeting.
They changed the word to originals.
Originals. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I called us the oldies, and they called it the originals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have Joe here raising his digital hand. Are you ready to take the next question, Bill?
Sure. Oh, Joe, okay. You never have questions. This is I
was quiet. I was just going to say, actually interesting that I read recently that Carl Jung actually met Alan Watts and spoke to Alan Watts. So maybe that was why he got some of his insights, what you said. Don't know that. But anyway, I was going to ask about that in the second chance at the end with what you said about Richard. And it actually says that he had terminal cancer, didn't he? That was diagnosed as inoperable. And then he recovered. And I mean, is that actually true, something that actually really happened? And were there actually people kind of around Sid and that who had inoperable
Well,
tumors
that's
or
for
something?
sure true, Joe. That's actually,
Yeah.
Jim Wallace had serious cancer, and then
Yeah.
it totally left his body. He's still living. He's older
Yeah.
than Bill is, and he's still living in a healthy life. And the curing of the cancer was one of the big reasons. He's one of the softest, deepest human beings on the face of the earth, and it just gave him the faith he needed to
Yeah.
stay in that and to share his wisdom. So but there are many stories like that, because we know truth heals. Not only it is true Sid dealt more with the mental side of the reality of healing, but he loved watching people have physical ailments that disappeared. People had mental breakdowns, of course, and then they were teachers and so on. Bill was even probably half an example of that, you know. So no, that's a given. We don't know, when Bill talks about the little dot, we don't know about the magnificence of mind, what it can do, but we know it does.
So Joe, it is true, as Harry said, that
Yeah.
in my understanding that worked. And but now Sid died of cancer. My wife died of cancer. We all die of something, right? But I think it's worthwhile. I don't know the name of the book right now. The lady Morgandi that just recovered and has spoken with
Anita, isn't it? Anita.
Right, and she had stage 4 breast cancer and had a cure. And in 1998, when my wife's whole chest was full of cancerous nodes, we went to. She asked if we could go to La Jolla, California, to Deepak Chopra's institute, where we went. I want whatever she wanted. And we went there for at least a week or 2 weeks. It might have even been 2 weeks. And do people know Deepak Chopra? Most people from India. And he wrote many books, 16, 18 books. And I sat with Deepak, and Deepak showed me at that time in 1998, this is 22 years ago, he showed me a pile of 9,000 cases that have been received by his institute, not from, but stories that had been he'd accumulated in a Japan institute that he was working with. This is 1998, and he wasn't interested in the principles. Truth. These principles are a metaphor. They're a metaphor for the truth, and to me they're the most reliable metaphor, but they're not the only metaphor to truth. And it's important that we know that, I think. But as I sat with Deepak, he had 9,000 cases between he and this Japan Institute of people, Joe, that had disseminated cancer, that had cured totally, that had freed from their cancer. Now, eventually those people are going to die, like we all are, right? But I said to Deepak, after he showed me that 9,000 cases with pathological slides of dissemination throughout the body, I said, was there anything that was common to those 9,000 people? And he said, yes. I said, what was it? He said, every one of them in their own language, in their own culture, indicated that they had an overwhelming, these are my words, clear, uncontaminated experience of the divine, of God. And in that state, their body healed. Now, this isn't about living forever. I mean, there is some scientists that say we are made to live about 115 years uncontaminated. Well, the key to me is not about longevity. It's about quality of life. And if we just decided today, the days that I have left, I had a lady one time that had a neuroblastoma, and she had been told she had 3 to 6 months to live, and she had 5 small children, and she was very angry. I think sadly she had been angry in her life for quite a while. But at this point in her life, given that she had 3 to 6 months to live, she came to me and she said, Dr. Pettit, I am very, very angry that this is happening to me. But it's not the way I want to live until I die. I want to find a place of peace. I want to find that place where love resides inside of me. That's what I want to find. Are you willing to assist me in that journey? And I said, absolutely, Rose, absolutely. And we went on that journey together. So it's not about, it's about all I can do is get present right now. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I got one question from Paula. And her question was, is psychiatry starting to acknowledge the divine mind system and bring it forth to help people? And she mentioned that she heard of primitive cultures in Africa whose village comes together to support one with the mental condition. Seems to be a more natural way of promoting healing.
Well, when you talk about psychiatry, you're talking about individuals in the end, aren't you? As my friend Dr. Mazaza says, it's the awakening of consciousness is one soul at a time. And Sid would say that. It's one soul at a time. When there's enough psychiatrists who've awakened, then the field of psychiatry will change. And I'm hoping that my book someday will along with Sid's books. And I always point this, Harry knows, I say, before you watch any video by Bill Pettit, read Sid Banks' 6 books twice and watch his 3 sets of videos that are free on www.sidbanks.com. Watch those 3 sets of videos at least twice, because you'll have different eyes and ears the second time through. And then if you want to go watch some of my tapes, fine. But I encourage you to do that first. I had something to say, but I got off and I don't know where I was and so I'm just back here with you. Maybe it'll come to me. If you know where I was headed, you can help me.
Can I add something to that, Bill?
Sure.
When you're dealing with the indigenous cultures, you're dealing with ancient wisdom more in a mystical manner. So they are naturally going to be looking at life from a less clinical perspective and a more of what we call a healing perspective, what Bill calls mental health perspective. And so they have something to contribute to this total view of life. But until they get the whole picture, it's like a chain is as strong as its weakest link until the chain is fully strong. But they have something to contribute. I can tell you that the understanding of the spiritual is something that struck the heart of Sid Banks. Anything that expressed the spiritual nature of who we are, he said, that's the way I see it too. So they will provide some answers to psychiatry, but of course the foundation has to be there of what Bill's talking about. And when they join with Bill, maybe the two of them together will have something to offer to the world in a fresher light. That's just my own perspective on it, personal perspective, Bill. You have nothing, not a fact, or that's a personal observation.
No, I think that's right. And it helped me go back to what I was going to say in response to what was said. Omar, there's a book that I'm going to encourage people to read if they're interested, and it's called Anatomy of an Epidemic, and it's by an investigative, award-winning investigative journalist named Robert Whitaker. Magic Bullets, Psychiatric Drugs, and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America. I'm going to try to make this point. It might seem too much form for some people, but it's exciting to me, and so I share it. There was an article in this month's American Journal of Psychiatry on alcoholism and deaths of despair. It's called Addiction as a Coping Response, Hyperkataphia, which is they made up, it's a Greek word, means really bad withdrawal, deaths of despair and COVID-19. But what it's showing is that when people drink alcohol, abuse it, there's a neuroadaptation of the body that responds that makes their anxiety. People drink oftentimes to reduce their anxiety. Well, there's a neuroadaptive thing that keeps raising the anxiety level to where there's never enough alcohol eventually to relieve the anxiety. People have to literally drink themselves into coma. And so your first question the intellect might ask is, how can that be beneficent? How can that be a beneficent universal mind? Well, if anxiety is a beneficent alarm system trying to wake you up, when there's a fire, you don't take a hammer to the fire alarm. Neuroadaptation that occurs in response to repeated substance use diminishes the euphoria and the relief, really, that is produced by the acute use of the drug and increases levels of physical and emotional stress between drug episodes. An individual who struggles with addiction then can be tempted to return to the drug use to reduce the misery that is caused by the use of the drug itself.
Yeah, that's brilliant, actually.
So that universal mind is not allowing the alarm system to be turned off. It's increasing the alarm louder and louder and louder. And yet if people don't see it as a love letter, they think, oh my God, this is terrible. And it's not. Now, what I saw when I read that is, wow, that explains what Whitaker is showing. And I'll just make a quick point after this, that in the last 60 years, since we've had primary use of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety medications, antidepressive medications, our degree of disability and relapse has gone like this as the medications, this multi-billion-dollar industry has been created. So that the research is literally showing, and now it makes perfect sense to me, there's two missing pieces that people don't have, is that neuroadaptation is actually making the anxiety higher and higher and the depression worse and worse and worse to try to get the person's attention. Much like the child goes, mommy, or I'll say daddy, being daddy, 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 until it gets my attention. That changes everything. That's incredible. Now, what's some of the evidence? Omar, you pointed to it. In 1969, the World Health Organization launched an effort to track schizophrenia outcomes in 9 countries, including at the end of 5 years, the 3 developing countries that didn't have much antipsychotics at that time, India, Nigeria, and Colombia, that didn't have antipsychotic medicine, at 5-year follow-up, had considerably better course outcomes than patients in the United States and in 5 other developed countries where they had medications. It shocked people, but because of their beliefs, they said this can't be true. So in 1978, the World Health Organization did it again. They did 10 countries this time, and they made sure they had people that diagnosed with a structured interview schizophrenia. In 5 to 7 years later, at the end of 2 years, nearly 2/3 of the patients in the developing countries had good outcomes. Many of them had recovered fully in people where they didn't have medications. Overall, 15 years later, after 5 to 7 years, only 37% of the patients had good outcomes and 59% became critically ill, where in the developing countries that didn't have medications, 2/3. So they did another study later, and at 7 years without any medications for schizophrenia, 40% recovered fully. Universal mind is always there looking for a crack to come through. And another 45% had moderate improvement in countries that had little or no medications. In countries like the United States and Russia that used high doses of medications for schizophrenia, they had 5 to 6% recovery versus 40% with no medications. Now, how the drug companies and psychiatry has kept this under wraps, it's unbelievable. But I think we're on the bridge of seeing, and now if we can explain to people, of course it makes sense that would be, because the medications are not evil. Like Sid said, the medication is God too. But it's meant to give you some temporary relief. And most of the studies are 6 to 8 weeks. And the medications do give some relief during that initial time. And they help people quiet down enough and not be terrified by their panic attacks or their anxiety attacks or the depression, that you have an opportunity to point them in the direction that Omar and Harry and many of you are pointing people in, to their spiritual essence. There's going to be incredible research that's going to be done. And tomorrow, Judy Sedgman and I are going to be working on 6 questions that have to be answered before we submit our paper with Jack Pransky and Tom Kelly to psychotherapy. We've worked on the article for 20 months, and we have not backed off from Sid's quotes and from Sid's spiritual. We've made it clear that this has been ignored way too long, and there's a crisis severe enough that we're going to ask people to please look, and here's where the research needs to happen. The last thing I'll say is, in Denmark, I recently wrote a chapter for the people in Denmark. Their second book is a 28-page chapter that they put at the end of their book that I believe had 21 or 16 transformational stories besides mine in their book. And they had another one that had 16 or 21 earlier that I think had won an award in Denmark. And I said to Christian Olsen, I said, Christian, if you could help about 25 other countries, because there's at least 45 countries now where there's pockets of Through Principles people, to get a book, help them use the model that you use to make a book of transformational stories of 20 people, get it published. And if those books started coming into the World Health Organization, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 15, 18, 22 countries, 25 countries, 30 countries, at some point, somebody at the World Health Organization is going to say, listen, and send them to the mental health division. At some point, the World Health Organization is going to say, we need to get $50 million and we need to do at least 9 countries, and we need to research this new understanding. So all we can do, all of us, is keep taking care of ourselves, as Sid said, and then listening and seeing what to do to help others. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah. Do you still have time for one more question?
I
Bill, or
do.
is it-
Sure. I only need about 15 minutes to get ready for the other, so I'm fine for even another 15.
Perfect. Thank you. Raha, could you unmute yourself, please?
Hello, Raha. I can see you.
Hi. Actually, it wasn't a question. It was just to add to your point. I'm a homeopath, and as a homeopath, we see, and actually, the human body is an intelligent organism.
Absolutely.
And just like everything in nature rectifies itself,
Right.
we are also part of nature. So our body also has the ability to rectify itself, because when it produces symptoms, it's actually trying to heal itself.
Exactly.
So
No, that's beautiful. And you bring up the point, Raha. Raha, do you say that right? Raha?
yes.
Raha. The universal principles are, the 3 principles are universal mind, universal consciousness, universal thought. Okay. Said simply, the universe, the entire universe, as Raha pointed out, the entire universe is intelligent, universal mind. It's conscious. It's the whole universe is conscious. Amoeba, one-celled amoebas are consciousness. Rocks, if they're near plants that send out messages to the rocks. I've had plant people tell me, and they send out messages to the rocks that are nearby asking for nutrients. Do you have any of these? We need these. And the rocks send back the nutrients to the plants. The entire universe is intelligent, it's consciousness, and it's creative, universal thought, divine thought. Think of it, to me, it's that simple. It's universal, it's intelligent, conscious, and creative. Mind, thought, and consciousness. 3 in 1. The divine energy of life, the divine that we're all not separate from. Anyway, that's the way, as Harry said, that's the way I see it, Your Honor. Anyone else?
Yeah. I think it's time to wrap this up.
Okay.
But I just want to ask you, like, do you have anything to say for those who are suffering from mental illness? What would you say to them?
Well,
Like,
if anybody's watched my videos, the first thing I've said to many people in the midst of full-blown psychosis is to sit with them quietly and listen as best as I could. And I'm glad to send them to you, Omar, a couple of the stories. But and then I have said to people, I want you to know that you are perfectly mentally ill, mentally healthy, and the apparent illness is just a lack of understanding. That you're perfectly mentally healthy, you just don't know it. You've got lost in the content of some of your thinking. It has created biochemical dysregulation. It has actually created epigenetic changes, that the genes that got turned on and turned off, so that this one person had been awake for 40 hours in a full-blown manic psychosis, despite 800 milligrams of Seroquel and 2100 milligrams of lithium. And I said, but you are perfectly mentally healthy. You've innocently affected your epigenetic changes so that you can't even speak, and you know what you want to communicate, but it's coming out as gibberish. And she told me later that that's the day, that moment, the healing began. at that moment. And she was in a full-blown psychosis. But that place of knowing that here's what happened 6 months later, she was in a fast tracking in a nursing program because she had a bachelor's degree in psychology, 18-month nursing program at West Virginia University. She was fast tracking in. She was working on the weekends as a certified nurse assistant to keep insurance for her 6-year-old little boy. And she was off all Seroquel, 800 milligrams, and she was on 300 instead of 2100 of lithium. And she presented to the grand rounds of the psychiatry at West Virginia University with all the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the nurses, the head of the department. And we presented together. We sat next to each other. And she talked about how her panic attacks disappeared as she got peaceful. Everything, her depression disappeared. And she said, so one of the residents said to her, Omar, said, what did you think when Dr. Pettit told you in the midst of a full-blown psychosis, awake for 40 hours, her 5th psychotic admission in 7 months, 26 years old. What did you think when he told you that you were perfectly mentally healthy? Now, some of you have heard her answer. She said, well, the first thought that came to my head was, oh my God, they've given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. True story. She said, the first thought that came to me was, oh my God, they have given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Now, when you think about that, that was I mean, in the midst of her full-blown psychosis, she has a moment of clarity that what he just said is crazy as hell, given what I've been told. But then she got quiet. She went to that place that Harry talks about, silence. And she said quietly, she said, the next thought that came to me came from a different place than that first thought, which was from the intellect, right? Stored information. She said, a second thought came to me from a different place. And that thought was, what he just said, I know is absolutely true. That's what Raha talked about. It made a little crack. There's a song by Leonard Cohen that the chorus is called the anthem. And the chorus, it's from the version I like, the video I like is live 2019 from London, 2008 from London, England. And his chorus is everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. But when I woke up the next morning, I thought that's partial truth. My intellect I couldn't find anything truer. But I woke up the next morning because if my intellect doesn't help me in 2 minutes, I don't count on it helping me in 25 years. I go to the divine thought system. I go to the present moment. And I woke up the next morning and what came to me was, aha, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets out. Because the light is coming through us. And all we have to do is make the lens less cloudy enough to let it come through a little bit. Everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets through.
Wow, this is beautiful. Thank you. And this reminds me of one of Rumi's quotes. And it says that the wound is the place where the light enters you.
Say the first word. I didn't hear it, Omar.
The wound is the place where the light enters you.
Interesting.
And that's the crack for me. But also, he also mentioned about when he said that when you feel distressed or depressed or mentally ill, these are love letters. There is a quote by Rumi.
Really?
He says that, these pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them.
Wow. See, that's what came to me separately, isn't it? That they're messengers. They're love letters. Yeah.
Yeah. and it shocked me actually. It reminded me of when I heard it first from you in one of your videos, and it was yeah, absolutely beautiful reminder.
If you can, I would love to have that reference of Rumi. If you can email me, or if you can, if you find it, or I'll have my secretary, my administrative assistant look. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And Bill, you mentioned a few stories. I'll send you Omar's email. If you could send that to him, we'll post those
Okay.
on our YouTube channel. People
Okay.
would appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, folks.
Sure.
I feel honored and it's been wonderful being with you.
It's been my pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you for accepting our invites, Dr. Bell. This has been absolutely amazing, at least to me, and I'm sure for everyone here who's attended this. And every time I hear you talking, it's just you never fail to bring me back to myself, to that place of you know, love and oneness and connection, and I feel connected to you and everyone here. Thank you very much for accepting our invites, and thank you for everyone for coming and attending.
Can you unmute people? Can you unmute people, Omar, so we can say goodbye? Is that possible?
Sure. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
All these beautiful voices.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Sandra Thomas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
Yes,
Bye.
you're very welcome.
In a while.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Bill.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks so much.
You're good.
Have a lovely holiday. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye-bye. Hi, Mark.
Bye.
Thanks, Dr. Bill. Thank you.
Hi, how you doing, Robbie?
Hi, Dr. Bill.
Yeah, bye-bye. Who was that? Who was that?
Bill.
Oh yeah, okay. From Sweden?
From Norway.
Norway. Oh my gosh. That was bad.